On. And we are live, Ep.6 of the Quarantiners. You have your hosts, Darko and Ben, and today we have a guest, Brian Powell. Ben, off to you.
Yeah, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Quarantiners. This is podcast number 6. Dark and I are super pumped to have another guest on. Brian Powell. We'll jump into what he's all about, what he likes, and what kind of gets him off and his idiosyncrasies and all that good stuff. Before we start, today is, what is today, the 19th? Yes, April 19th. Just to kind of give everybody a recap, since we are called the Quarantiners, let's figure out where we're at. The U.S. is currently at 40,000 deaths so far for the coronavirus, which is insane, and 165 worldwide. RIP and respects to everybody whose family has gone through all this stuff. It's a heavy subject matter, so we will stay clear of that, but just to give everybody kind of a heads up of where we're at. Brian, what's going on, man?
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Glad to get to hang out with some people and talk, socialize.
Right?
Yeah.
Almost forgot how to do it.
Yeah. No, it's a good way to socialize, definitely. It's a modern way to socialize, I feel like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the future, unfortunately.
Good and
Hopefully
bad.
not exclusively, yeah.
So tell us what's, well, first off, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am 33 years old, married, and I've got 3 kids. One 5-month-old, one 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old with trisomy 13, genetic condition.
Nice.
My beautiful wife, Melissa. I am a photographer, and I like doing almost all things outside. I'm an entrepreneur. I love theology and philosophy, and I love thinking about thinking.
All things metaphysics.
Yeah.
I love it, man. That's my world too. I like asking the big, deep questions that matter. That's kind of why I enjoy that stuff.
No, definitely. That would be how do you call that? Large talk, or whatever is opposite from the small talk. It will be big
That's
talk.
right. Yeah, exactly.
It's the foundations on which we should build our existence, really.
Yeah, our worldview, how we look at the world. Everything's informed by our on how we believe it. Why are we here? I mean, what are the big 3 questions? How did it start? Why are we here? And where is it going? Or something like that.
Well, those aren't the biggest questions.
Yeah.
It's like the biggest question is, do we exist? And the answer obviously is yes.
Yes,
We do
that's
exist.
right.
Yeah.
You're not a nihilist.
No. But I would say I am a solipsist.
Okay, interesting. You want to dive into that a little bit? And let me look up the definition for those who don't know it. Solipsism, right? Solipsism.
Solipsist? Yeah, solipsism.
Yes, sir. The theory that the self. See, I was actually going to ask you about that one. I couldn't remember the word. I thought it was nihilist, which is why I brought it up. So solipsism, for those who don't know, is the belief that you're the only thing that you can really know for sure exists. A theory of holding that the self can know nothing but its own modifications, and that the self is the only thing existing, is the only existent thing. Interesting. I mean, I guess when it comes down to it, since you're the only thinking person that you can think with.
If it's possible that you're the only conscious being in the entire universe, like that should change the way you live, right?
I think it has both negative and positive implications.
Sure. Yeah. Depends on what you do with it.
For real. Yeah, you could easily look at this and be like, all right, well, if I'm the only one that exists, then Darko doesn't matter. And I want his car, so I'll just off Darko and go get that car.
I've kind of taken an opposite viewpoint on that. It's like the point of existence itself is to empathize.
And do you think empathy is, and we're diving into this topic. I think we'll just dive into it because there's so many.
So long story short, I get your car, right?
Yes, that's right.
Right.
A roundabout way, just to get back to my point.
About that, I'm fine. We can dive into this. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, no. So we were talking about solipsism, and you said it's kind of based on empathy. And my question is empathy inherent? Do you think humans are born with empathy?
I don't think it's necessarily a human thing. I think that consciousness itself requires empathy in order to perceive otherness.
Wow, that's actually an interesting word there, otherness.
Yeah.
Yeah, empathy is one of those things that I feel, empathy and sympathy, right? There's a real nuanced difference between the two, but I guess for the sake of the conversation, let's just assume that they're both the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
To give compassion to somebody else, or to feel the pain of somebody else, right? Is that
put yourself in their perspective?
Yeah, exactly. And I always thought it was an interesting thing, like, you know right away when you're inflicting pain on somebody, because you can see it in their body language, right? Emotional pain or physical pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are your thoughts?
But you don't always know immediately, but certainly you can.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the degree of pain.
Like if you step on somebody's foot, you might not even know that you're stepping on their foot, but it's still hurtful.
Yeah, I think that it's I think that there's a lot of variables that come into play there, that it's very hard to, I think, define anything, because I think that empathy, and I'm not saying that this is something that is like this, but I'm just thinking about this topic, and I'm just thinking, and I'm think that like how you were brought up, like what were the effects, what effects did the economy have on you, what effects did the state of your family at that time had on you, what I think that there's a lot too many variables to think about. And then you said that like we can see how that other person reacts. I don't think that's true. Like there's a lot of people, especially here, that hide how they feel. And if you ask someone how are you doing here, like they're gonna say, I'm fine, I'm doing well, I'm doing great. But I think that they don't even know how they feel. So I feel like people are sometimes not even empathetic with themselves. Like you shut yourself down out, by consuming so much information. And this is just a theory. Like I'm not saying anything is definite, but you consume so much information, you are bombarded with information from all over the place. Like if you just get into the supermarket and you walk to the aisle, you're bombarded with information, like everywhere. At home, you're on social media, on the phone, there's a computer, there's TV, just bombarded with information. Like do we take enough time to dive inside of ourselves and see, how we feel? Like can we, if we don't do that, can we feel also empathetic for other people, truly honestly feel empathetic to other people, or do we fake that? That's another thing. And I think that it's just but I want to hear more. I think that it's a very complicated topic to discuss, definitely.
But yeah, I guess what I was saying when I was talking about seeing their expression, obviously you guys make valid points. If I say, hey Brian, how are you, and you're actually going through a horrible marriage and you just don't want to let anybody know because it's very personal and it's awkward to bring it up, you'd be like, I'm doing good, like living the dream, like that's what you'd say. But what I was thinking of, like if I was to like punch you in your jaw, you'd be like, and there'd be a written expression on your face that says back to me, like, whatever I just did to Brian actually inflicted some kind of pain on him. Now that can be obviously physical if I punch you, but if I say something like, hey Brian, you're a weak man, like whatever it is, those emotional triggers as well could signify physical outreach. And by those expressions, I know that, what I just did must have caused him pain and hurt, and I don't want to do that because I don't like to see him in that way. I like it better when I see him smiling, and so then I act in accordance with the behavior that makes you smile. That was kind of where I was coming at.
Sure. So I guess this might be a side topic, but the idea of being offended, like if you called me a weak man and like that doesn't bother me because I know it's not true. I'm very physically strong. I'm mentally strong. So it doesn't affect me. But if I were like skinny and weak and frail, and you called me weak, then it would resonate with me and it would affect me.
Exactly.
So when people are like, in order for somebody to be offended by something, it has to resonate with them in one way or another, and often in ways that they don't that they're not consciously aware of.
Yeah, no, that's a solid point. Darko, what were you saying?
No, I mean, I think that, again, I think it gets very complicated. It's just because, maybe like, maybe that person is, what if someone is so, again, we can dive into topics. I think there are different cultures out there, and there are different people thinking in different ways. I see people here getting offended much more easily than what, I would see people, I'm from a different country. I'm from, Southeastern Europe, and it's much harder. No, I'm from Montenegro. It's
There
much
we go.
harder
Shout out to
offend
Montenegro.
people. It's much harder to offend people over there, and we tend to joke about stuff. I think that, and this might be derailing this whole conversation, but I feel like today people here are a lot. They're working on eggshells a lot, and there is a lot of especially and not just in between people, but there are some larger topics where you have to be very careful what you're saying. Not saying that we shouldn't respect, everyone should be respected, but I feel like people are fishing for social credit. They're fishing for social credit. Like, for example, if you call out people, oh, you offended me for what, I'm fishing for anything. I'm going to try to find anything that possibly, even if, I mean, it may not have to do anything with me, but, it offends me. Like, if you say something at workplace or something, I'm going to, say, oh, you can't say stuff like that. It's offensive to me. I mean, I'm just saying, like, and, of course, I'm diving into things that are more like, I think there are some work examples that I had with this stuff, where you just it gets to the point where it's ridiculous, we're just talking, and it's you have to be you're under the HR spell doing work, of course, but there are people who are fishing for those, and this didn't necessarily happen to me, but there are people that are fishing for people to say something wrong so they can get some social credit because they call that person out.
Do you know what I think that stems from? I think that stems from, and Brian, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, but I think that, because you're right, I've seen people do that. They're looking for that. It's a form of self-righteousness, right? Yeah. It's what it comes down to. It's what I think is right. Everybody else needs to think is right. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, it's more of an excuse that they use to neglect their even deeper moralities that come from it, right? Like they don't want to really think the deep questions. A lot of people, I feel like, don't really want to talk about the deep questions because it's scary. When you start asking those questions, like, does God exist? It's insecure. No, 100%. Yeah. 100%. They're insecure, and they're afraid that if they start digging deep, they're going to find answers that they don't like, and that could rock their entire worldview and crush them, and they'd have an existential crisis, which I think everybody should have because it's a blast.
I love them.
I love them too, man. So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on what Darko was saying? Do you see that as being kind of prevalent in the U.S. as far as people looking for virtue points or virtue signaling?
I'm not really sure where he's getting that from. Maybe.
Well, let me give you an example. How about this?
An example. Yeah.
You're just sitting around with friends, and you can joke around. You can say I guess I'm just seeing that less of that here. When I go to Montenegro, I see friends joking around to a very far extent. and we're having a good time. It's funny. It's hilarious. You know, it's
I
like
have
if you go
great
to a
friends.
comedy. I know. But if you go to the comedy show, like, you know, none of that stuff can't go like between the friends. Like you can hear that stuff from a comedian, but you're never gonna like. I feel like there is like that HR spell kind of flows into the social life afterwards, and I guess you know what, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but that's why we have this podcast. We're just talking things through. But
no, you know what, Darko, that's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
All we're doing is we have these thoughts, and I used to say this a lot, right? We have these thoughts that are unpolished. We haven't really thought through them, and then having the ability to have a conversation with people and go back and forth and have that dialectical dialogue, you can polish that thought until it's an actual pearl. So there's nothing wrong with what you're saying, and I know exactly what you're saying, right? I can't say, hey, look at that Chinese guy, because people will be like, that's racist, and you're like, no, technically it's not. He's actually from China, or he has an ethnicity that stems from China. Yeah. Everybody knows what somebody who's from Asian descent looks like. Everybody knows anybody that's from Latin America, and that's the cool thing about it that people got to treasure. Every ethnicity has their own peculiarities, right? Yeah. Like English people have, not all English people, but we don't have the best teeth, and we have real solid noses, and we have very slender faces, as do Netherlands people. And then you go to places like Samoa and Hawaii and Japan, more round faces. It's all of those physical features exist. But to your point,
I'm not even
people
going
get
there.
offended.
Like, not even going to, like, of course, like all that racial stuff, that should not be, you know, like you should, I mean, I try to be very careful about that. You know, I'm not going to offend anyone like on that matter. That's fine. But like, if you're with friends and you call someone, hey, dude, you're being an idiot. Why are you doing that? And that person gets mad because of that. Like, I think that's a little bit, you know, just relax. We're having a good time. I'm not offending
you. Ask
you.
yourself, are you being an idiot?
Think that you're an idiot. You know, I don't actually think that you're an idiot. You know, I'm not trying to offend, you know, anyone who has mental illnesses or anything like that by calling you an idiot. I'm just, you know, I'm just telling you what, like, should I be more formal? You know, like you
feel closer to people when you're joking with them.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't have the humility to make fun of yourself and laugh at yourself, I got a lot of stupid things I do, and my wife calls me out on them all the time, right?
Yeah.
And you gotta laugh because, like, I do that. You know, I don't know why I do it, but that's just the way I do it. Sometimes it's annoying, sometimes it's silly.
Yeah.
But when I first moved to Charlotte, and then we'll jump to another conversation. I got a list of questions I want to ask Brian after this.
Yeah.
But when I first moved to Charlotte, I grew up in a really Christian household, sheltered, some would say. I didn't really know anything about the bar scene. I didn't know anything about any of those things, right? And I had a roommate that moved with me from Kansas City because our job had opened up a new office in Charlotte. And he was the kind of guy that would like to poke fun and shoot the shit, as they say, right? And you know, prod and poke fun at you. And I didn't come from that. So he would be like, he'd say things, you know, like, you know, this is going to hurt some people's ears, but hey, what up, Beckett? What are you doing? You know, and you're like, oh, that hurts. Why'd you call me that? But he was just joking. He was trying to, like, you know, and he would get to the point sometimes where he's like, dude, you can make fun of me. Like, that's the game. I make fun of you. You make fun of me. We don't take each other that serious, but we laugh, and, you know, who can get the greatest dig? I had to learn that, man. I was 25 years old in Charlotte, never being around that in my life, and I had to understand what he was doing. And then I had to understand, like, you go to a bar, he buys you a beer, you buy him a beer, you talk about life, you get deep. Like, all those things you have to learn. And some people never are surrounded by people who
that's one way to do it. It's not necessary to do it that way, but that's certainly one way to go about it. But with all that being said, are you guys comfortable with talking about theology and stuff? Let's get down to the foundations of existence here.
I think we dive into it with these questions.
Okay.
How about this?
Yeah. Sure.
All right, let's talk about.
Well, I mean,
You want to talk about that one first?
Hold on. I can't see with my lighting setup here. Okay, so I'd prefer to do something a little less scripted than going through like
a list. All right, where do you want to start? I'll let you start the road here.
I guess where are you guys at? What's your theological
Oh, he
starting
flipped the
place?
question on you. On us.
I like it. Very Socratic. Very Socratic of you, Brian. I'll start off, and then we'll go round robin here. I grew up Pentecostal in a church that believed in speaking in tongues, and
Church
was
of God denomination?
No, it was United Pentecostal Church, so UPC. So it was like a slightly splintered off version of Church of God. Church of God is the same thing, but I think the difference is, and I'd like to dive into this with you because these are some fun conversations, but and I will say I'm fallible from the very get-go. Anything that I say that I think I know, I don't necessarily know with 100% certainty, right? So I'm open to being wrong to anything that I say. But as far as my history, I can't be wrong about that. Grew up what's called Oneness Pentecostal. I'll go into that in a second. We spoke in tongues. We demonstratively worshiped. We ran around the church, raised our hands, a lot of outward celebratory type worship. And then I went to a Nazarene church for like a year and a half, and we went back to the Pentecostal church. And then I moved here, and this was really an opportunity that I believe God gave me to really deconstruct everything I believe from the ground up, because, you know, it's one thing to really be faithful. It's another thing to go to the church that you've been going to your entire life and believe that. And then it's another thing completely to destroy everything you believe in, get rid of all of it, and start finding out what do I believe and why do I believe what I believe. And so today, when I went to Charlotte, I went to a non-denominational church for a while, largely for community. And then when I got married, my wife and I found a church, which happened to be, and we didn't know this at the time, which is ironic and perhaps full circle, but we found a church called Central Church, which might be a Church of God, but it's Pentecostal as well. And we didn't know they were Pentecostal because nobody was speaking in tongues. We didn't know about it until maybe 3-4 months into the church when the pastor said, I'm a Pentecostal preacher. And I go, what did he just say? My wife goes, he said Pentecostal. I was like, have we been going to a Pentecostal church this whole time? So that's where I am at as far as the denomination I'm going to. That obviously precludes that I believe in a God, and I'd be happy to go down that topic too. But Darko, what do you got, brother?
So to be clear, you are a Christian, you're a theist, standard Pentecostal-ish. Okay.
So I'm somewhere between theism and deism.
Okay. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So theism being that there is a God that, I mean, it's also the root prefix in theology, right? That there is a God that ordains everything and sets things up and he's engaged in day-to-day life of believers. A deist is someone who believes in a God, but that he's kind of stepped back, so to speak, and more from an observatory type standpoint, kind of just enjoys his creation without really engaging that much. So it depends. I feel at times, and it's largely just based on emotion and feeling, you know. I mean, there's some logical explanation we could get into, but those are the two that I see myself resting at more so.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And you can
Darko,
expound
how about
upon
you?
that.
I mean, I grew up Christian Orthodox, and I grew up I was born in Yugoslavia, and Yugoslavia used to be a socialist country, so there is no religion in socialist countries.
So it was Yugoslavian? I'm sorry, I didn't know this part. When you were born, it was still Yugoslavia?
Yeah, it was Yugoslavia.
Cool.
Yep.
That's awesome, dude. I didn't know that. All right.
It wasn't awesome, but I think a month after that, or a month before I was born, there was a war. So and then it became a smaller Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was shrinking, you know, at that time. Anyway, so yeah, before my time, like the religion was, you know, taboo, and it was I don't know much about, you know, what was actually going on, but I know that yeah, it was essentially, you know, forbidden to go to church and stuff like that. But yeah, I grew up Orthodox, and I grew up in, you know, so Orthodox Church, to give you some insight, like it's one of the oldest churches there are. You initially had the church, and then it got split into Catholic and Orthodox Church. And it was, I don't want to dive into the whole history, but Orthodox Church was very important, for the Byzantine Empire, and then it spread mostly to the Eastern Europe. And you have countries like Greece, Russia, and then countries like Western Balkan countries mostly. That's where this church is predominant.
Yeah.
And you will see some amazing churches. So you think that churches that they built here are amazing? These churches are literally tens of millions of euros or dollars. I don't even know. That's how expensive they are, and people are still building them. I'm not a fan of that, honestly. I think that it's kind of stuck in time, the way that they do it, the way that they build it. Of course, it's beautiful and all of that, but I don't think that's what this is all about. There's a lot of there's a lot of traditions that come with that church. I respect, most of the traditions, but also there are some things that just, in my opinion, do not make much sense. If you look at Christianity, and if you look at Bible, and go from there. Of course, there's a lot of things that do not make any sense, in the church here in the United States either. I think that, from my perspective, it's absolutely ridiculous that there's so many different denominations, and it's just, how, is that something that Jesus was envisioning for us? I don't think so. That we are so divided, that we have so many different versions of Christianity. Essentially, what these things are, and
let's go deep into like what you actually believe.
Yeah, we'll touch on denominations here in a second. But sum it up. You believe in God, blah blah blah.
Yeah. Let's go from there. I believe in God, and yeah.
And then you're a Christian.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then I'm writing some of these topic points on as we go. We might be able to dive into them a little bit.
Don't mind me asking, like, what's your relationship to God in your I guess religion or philosophical belief?
Relationship. I think that's a pretty broad question. Like, can you be more specific, or?
Geometrically, where are you at compared to God?
Yeah. Do you pray daily, or do you see him more as a God that you don't interact with, like stuff like that, right?
I mean, of course, I pray. I mean, I don't only pray. I think that being a Christian is more about, your actions than just you praying and just you doing things and just you. I think it's a lot about your actions, because I think being a Christian, we can pray, but then, like, I see a lot of sin, like, around. I see a lot of sin and a lot of people praying, but then sin, and it's really, if you dive into like the philosophy of the whole thing, 40% of this nation is, I'm discussing what I'm thinking. 40% of this nation is obese. And if you think about it, I don't see anything Christian about that, because there are people dying of hunger. And it's we can pray in a church and then after go to the brunch and eat so much food that is costing some people on the other side of the world so much, and consume a ton of things. I mean, it's a way of thinking about it. I'm not trying to be too cynical or anything like that, but I guess how good we are. I feel like Christianity is a Bible is created for us to be to be a guide how to live life, and just praying to me means nothing. Of course I pray. It's a form of meditation for me. I pray and I I see great benefits from that. I'm able to touch, I'm able to dive into myself and, figure out things that way. Like, what do I need to do? What I'm thankful for. It helps me. But I also try to be actionable and see, am I actually being, a good person? Am I doing things, and like, let's review the actions that I, pulled today. Like, was this good? Is this helping me become closer to, God? Or, I think that and it's hard for us to even, like, there is a lot of perspectives too. Like, maybe this is good if you compare it, with the rest of the Americans, but is it good if I compare myself to the rest of the world? I don't know. So it's what are your thoughts? Do you think that Christianity is about, do you think that it's, a lot about, what you are, like the actions that you perform during the day, than if, I don't know. I'm not saying that I'm perfect. Like, I'm not saying that I'm perfect. Of course, none of us are. We all are, like, if according to the Bible, we are all sinners. But does it matter if we are, sinning, consciously every day, or does it? I guess
so two questions.
So,
Two questions to sum up what Darko said.
All right.
Darko used prayer and speaking to God, and then Brian, we never even got to hear your relationship.
I'd love to get into it.
All right, dive in, bro.
All right, so I went to school to be a pastor. I studied theology. I was planning on being a pastor, and so I put in a good 10,000 hours, if not 20, studying theology, philosophy, religion. I obviously concluded that I'm a solipsist foundationally, and I am a Christian, which a lot of people think is contradictory, but I don't, and here's why. So the Christian gospel is that we humans are sinners, and by that I mean that we're separated from God through sin, as perfect beings, and through Jesus, Jesus bore our sin. He took the punishment for us. We are now, because Jesus took that, there's no longer any separation between God and man, and we are now one with God in a very real way. Even Christian philosophy believes that this happens at the instant that you're saved. And I don't really see it as ever not being the case. I guess the way that I think of Christianity is you are one with God. If you believe it, it's true. That's really the Christian gospel. And I guess the way that I kind of live my life as a solipsist is that I kind of take the first person perspective as like the starting point. Where else can you start, So the first person perspective is kind of all of everything. The universe itself is expanding from the point of perspective. You are literally the center of the universe. So like my perspective is that everything that I'm perceiving is in my mind, and the way I interact with it, it's all me. It's all just my thoughts interacting with themselves. And then I just need to decide who I want to be. And obviously, Christian theology teaches that God is a good God, and I want to be good. So that's the type of person I want to be. And I try to live that out, trying to be the best person I can be, thinking of myself, like, what would God do if he were me in my shoes right now?
WWJD, baby.
Yeah.
Bringing us back to the basics. I like it. You said a few things I want to touch on real quick. You said, and I didn't know this about you, Brian, so this is kind of cool to kind of understand about you. What was the catalyst to you wanting to be a pastor, and what age were you when you had that catalyst?
I became a Christian in middle school, and
high school. 15, 16?
Something like that, maybe 14 or 13.
Okay.
But then I really started getting interested in theology when I was like a senior in high school, talking about like Calvinism versus Arminianism sort of thing.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I like it, the rose or whatever it's called. Tulip.
Yeah, tulip.
Tulip.
Yeah. So I actually went to a Church of God University, Lee University, to study Bible and theology, even though I am a Calvinist.
So you are a Calvinist?
I am.
Ah, this is interesting. Okay.
I didn't know what are differences between all these.
All right, let me bring up Calvinism real quick. Let me just, before we dive into it, I just want to make sure, because there's so many definitions that we're going to be touching on during this conversation. A lot of people want to stay up to what we're saying. So
and really, even reading the the definition of Calvinism isn't going to do it. It's extremely complicated.
So maybe do a better job of defining it.
I don't really think it's necessary to get into it unless we're going to have a debate on the topic right now. But generally, it's that God is sovereign over absolutely everything. And I look at that like every single minute, like infinitesimally small detail is completely dictated by the infinitesimal moment before. So nothing can happen that wasn't going to happen based on the infinitely small space of time event that happened right before. So like everything that is going to happen was always going to happen.
Okay, so it's all. So that also gets into the free will conversation, which I don't want to derail us. But
I mean,
but continue
free will
talking.
is just a matter of perspective. Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, it's just a matter of like on what level, on what scale are you looking at? Because of course, like we have this perception of free will, like we can seemingly do things and make choices and things like that, but fundamentally, like nothing is ever going to happen that wasn't always going to happen.
And that's kind of the crux of the Calvinist belief then, right? Okay, so that's cool. So keep going on. You were talking about the catalyst to being a pastor. You were 13. And was there anybody in your life that you had kind of looked up to, inspired you, influenced you, or was it a moment?
Yeah. So my pastor, obviously Jesus, God himself. And I was like really passionate about Christianity. I really do think it's a great and very useful
religious philosophy
structure to structure to live your life.
Nice.
It covers a lot of bases. I think it oversteps in a lot of ways, and I think it doesn't go far enough in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. All right, cool. So you're 13. Your pastor kind of helped influence you. Obviously, Jesus and God did as well. That's awesome, man. I think I was probably around that age. I think it's probably a pretty pivotal age for most men. I can't speak for women, but for men, a lot of my friends, 13 was kind of that age where you have that almost revelation that, hey, I'm aware of kind of what's going on. Did you grow up in Christianity, by the way?
Oh, yeah. Since I was a baby, going to church.
Oh, cool. Yep. And so the other thing that you said that I wanted to kind of flesh out too, which is interesting, and you're a guest, so that's why I'm grilling you, bro. And because I'm interested, I'm curious to know what's in your head. You said that one of the beliefs that you have is you're saved. That, like, I can't remember quite the quote you said, but you said the instant you are saved. And so I wanted to talk on that instant. What is the instant in your opinion?
I was more so Christianity, or at least the Christianity is way too broad.
The interpretation.
In the, I guess, the interpretations and whatever theological beliefs that I hold to, it seems to me that like the idea of like salvation, and I personally don't even understand it thoroughly myself. I haven't worked through all the kinks in articulating this, but Christianity, and more specifically like Baptist, the church that I go to, they believe that when you're saved, like that's like you are no longer separated from God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When you believe that Jesus bore the penalty for your sins, then there is no longer any separation.
And does the belief require any accompanying prayer or act?
No.
Just
as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
Yeah.
Just curious, and I don't know. I don't have the right answer. All right, we're both. I'm going off of my own.
I think that's what Jesus was trying to get at.
Yeah.
Like, it's the point is not to do the things. It's like you're not going to find God in the scriptures, and that's the whole thing of like Jesus. That's why Jesus is so angry at the Pharisees. They're like, okay,
it's limiting.
Yeah. They're like trying to put God in a box, and Jesus is like, you're missing the entire point of this.
Yeah. No, I have always thought that was interesting too. Like Jesus comes to get rid of the law, and then we build our own law and we call it the Bible.
Yeah.
And then we're like,
Law 2.0. This is what Jesus wanted. No.
Yeah, and it's like, wait, doesn't that kind of contradict what he was all about? Like he was more about the spirit rather than the letter of the law. Another question for you. And this goes into kind of my world a little bit because I grew up oneness Pentecostal, and I don't know if you know what that is, but
I don't. I'm really curious.
Exactly, and I want to touch on it because when my friend Topher Welch, a good friend of mine, brought up the fact that he went to a Church of God and he was very interested in religion, we started talking, and when he said he was Pentecostal, yeah, that's right. So when Topher said that he was Pentecostal or Church of God, I automatically assumed that he believed that the Trinity was more of a literal, like a literature type phenomenon rather than an actuality. And so to give you context, my church believes, and this is semantics, right, through and through. We believe that Jesus is God and the Holy Ghost is Jesus and all of that. But there's not 3 in 1. It's literally just one. It's modalism, I think, was the old term used to describe it. Whereas I think the other ones literally do believe that there are 3 in 1. Do you want to expound on your belief?
I've actually never heard anybody ever give me a good description of the Trinity that I'm like, yeah, this makes sense and I can understand this. Nobody has ever even given me anything substantial enough for me to be like, there is something worth looking into in this. Really, the Trinity does not interest me.
Interest you enough to dive into it, but it's based.
Yeah, to have. I mean, there's not enough information to make a conclusion.
Conclusive argument.
Some sort of articulate conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so funny.
At least as far as I'm concerned.
No, I'm with you. I've watched plenty of debates. I've watched a specific debate that's 3 hours long, and I've watched it like 8 times.
I'm not saying it's not important or that it's not right or wrong in some way, but I just.
You don't think it's the crux to your religion or to your belief?
There's not enough information there to unpack. Like, I mean, there's just not enough to talk about as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and that's so. The oneness Pentecostals, when people say that Jesus sits on the right hand of God, the oneness Pentecostals ask
metaphorically.
Exactly, and that's what the oneness Pentecostals say. They're like, there is no right hand of God. God is omnipresent.
Literally everything in the universe is a metaphor.
Yeah.
There's like this There's nothing that exists unto itself except consciousness itself. Everything only exists because it's related to other things.
Yeah. I mean,
It's all geometry.
Well, that's a funny.
Comes down to that.
That's a funny unpacking as well, because that goes back to the question of would God be God if there wasn't us, if there wasn't people, and he was the only being in the entire universe?
I guess it would depend on how you define God, because I know that I define God in several ways and different ways than I've heard anybody else talk about God.
Yeah,
So how do you define God?
Oh, this is a good question, man. This is definitely one of those fireside chats with a nice beer and some LSD. I'm kidding. So as far as my definition on God is concerned, as it stands now, he is the beginner of all. He is the creator. He's the one thing that he's the start. He's the spark to it all, man. Is my opinion. I sometimes play devil's advocate with myself in the sense that, what if everything, all of it, you, me, plants, bees, clouds, all of it was, the consciousness, universe, stars, all of it. What if that was the actual definition of what God really was? Just that totality of that. But I think I believe him to be more of a personal. If we go back as far as to the very first question, do you believe the universe had a beginning? If you don't, and you believe it's ever present, always existing, well, that really is the foundation to that question that you just asked me. Do you believe, like, who is God? Well, it depends. If the universe had a beginning, then that means somebody had to make a choice to start it. And if somebody had to make a choice to start it, that somebody has a personality. They can choose. They can make decisions. And if they can choose and they can make decisions, they can act within time and space, and they can intervene in life. If you believe what the current belief is, that the Big Bang is the beginning, there's a whole bunch of questions that go into that as well. What caused the explosion? What was it that exploded? Right? There's scientists try to talk. There's actually a Bible verse, right? They see themselves as being wise.
I've got some great theories on this.
Go for it, brother. Unpack it if you want.
Okay, so I think it's all related, theology and physics. In this great metaphor that's been given to us called fractals. Are you familiar with them?
Of course I am. I'll bring up a fractal while you talk about it.
Yeah. So it's a fractal is like a mathematical equation. It's a repeating geometric pattern that's infinite in scale. Any infinitesimal point on a fractal can be zoomed in, and you'll find that singular point also contains all of it. It's you can infinitely zoom in forever and ever, and yeah, that's beautiful. That's a Mandelbrot fractal. Yeah, so you can just zoom in forever and ever and ever, and it'll just keep repeating itself. So the point is that there's points in a fractal, but each point contains the fractal itself. It's all of everything. So God, in my opinion, or I guess like what I've come to see, is that God is like a fractal in that he is all of space and time, all of consciousness in every dimension, everything. He's that singularity. He's the infinite expanse, and now here in this present first-person perspective, we have the singularity. So all of the universe comes together to create consciousness, and that is the point. So the point is consciousness, and then the expanse is I guess I'm wording this kind of poorly, but So God is not just the singularity, but he's also the infinite. It's a combination. They're the same thing. Like a fractal, the point is the infinite. And so
I don't blame you for having a hard time trying to define God.
Yeah.
That's not an easy task.
Yeah.
Dangerous task to try to figure out like Christianity, like Bible. I think it's dangerous to read Bible by yourself and try to figure out things, but that's just my opinion. Yeah.
I think it's better than having somebody else tell you what it means. That's for sure.
Well, I think there's wisdom in counsel.
There are ways to do this without just having someone to tell you. Like there's also a conversation, but I mean that's just my opinion. But yeah, where I was going, but yeah, go. You finish that, but then we can.
We don't have to get into the physics of it tonight, but I guess the start of the universe. I guess we will because we're here and it seems pertinent. So it's like a fractal. The Big Bang, my understanding of it is that space expanded, but it's also time itself that was condensed into the singularity. All of space and time right there, singular. And as you know, with the expansion of time, time is relative. So if there's a singularity where space and time exist, then that exists forever, infinitely. That means it's happening right now. And we're also experiencing this because we're here. We're experiencing everything. So it's like a fractal in that there's the singularity and the infinite together. But I guess I have some theories on time as well, but we don't have to get into that tonight.
Hey, dude, we got all the time in the world.
Yeah, we do. I mean,
we can literally go. And we can have a part 2 as well.
Yeah, we can part 41. But so my problem is what I'm struggling with is and you guys let me know if I'm wrong. The reason why I say it's dangerous is just because we can all have different opinions about this stuff. And I'm not saying there are people that were very right about this stuff, and I'm sure that Brian is not doing this by himself. He has conversation with people just like he has conversation with us right now. And Brian I know that you are open to other people's opinions, and then we are all intellectuals here in a way, that we are actually thinking and taking other people. So where I'm going to is I guess how, like you mentioned physics. How does science and technology, how do they influence our view of Christianity as a religion? Like how let's say in 100 years we figure out things like like we can live forever. We figure out things like that. How do we fit that in the mold of different views of Christianity that we have today? I guess my understanding is like, do we need all of these different I just want to understand, like, why do we need all these different churches, which are essentially opinions of possibly groups of people, or maybe Calvin. I don't know much about Calvinism. I'm not educated a lot in this matter, but I'm just trying to understand. I'm kind of providing that third view, kind of view at this. So I'm trying to see, I guess, how do we translate this through, like, what if we have a breakthrough in physics, in 50 years, and then everything changes, or we see, fractals actually have even these other units or things. I don't know. It's possible.
Let me say two things to what you're saying, and then I'll let Brian jump in. One thing, you said physics and law, right? And that's another thing I think is important to consider. There are laws to the nature that we live in, and if there's laws, then that precludes a lawmaker. And then the second piece that I wanted to say, as far as denominations, I think Jesus had somewhat of an idea. If he came he knew what he was kind of doing. He said, I didn't come to bring peace, but I came to bring a sword, to draw mother away from daughter, father away from son. Those are his words. He knew that if he was going to come, there were going to be men who would write about him. And if men wrote about him, they were going to put it into a book, and then they were trying to tell other men about him. And when you put any reality into any three-dimensional reality in a two-dimensional text, then you're opening it up to interpretation. And when you open it up to interpretation, you're going to have a variety of interpretations, thus denominations.
You'll never, there's no way to perfectly convey the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting.
Except
like
direct knowing.
when you are discussing this stuff, and you guys dive deep into it, you are opening yourself to the world. Like these things are, it's very sensitive when you share such deep thoughts. Of course, you're going to get red team from from other people. I'm not trying to bash anyone or anything. I'm just trying to talk. And of course, like we can. I'm glad that you're diving deep into this stuff instead of we can focus on good things that Christianity brings, like empowering every person in the world by giving them significance that people at the time, many people didn't have that significance because of the way that people were ruled. Like you were considered a god if you were a king, or whatever the title were at that time. You had that divine whatever power over people. But Christianity brought that other element where everyone is equal, everyone has a right for a life after after this life. So it's of course, like I'm glad that we are actually diving into different ideas here. But Brian, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking too much here. But I'm searching for some thoughts, and I'm just searching through to see I'm here. I feel like I'm a red team here for you guys, but so, continue.
I'm a Calvinist only because I feel like it's and maybe even I don't know. So I'm a Calvinist because I think that it's the most consistent with the Bible as far as theological perspectives. I feel like if you're going to be a Christian, you might as well believe that God is sovereign and that things are predestined and that God is in control over everything, which I know that some non-Calvinists believe that. It just
my counter
seems to be the most consistent to me.
Mike, if I could present just a disparate point of view on that, I feel like the question that everybody asks, and this is I'm going to build up to the point I make. The question everybody else asks, why does evil exist, is the same reason why I don't necessarily believe that God knows the beginning and the end, right? That's if we're going off the Bible, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's dictated what will happen in between. He just knows, hey, this is how it started, and I know, foreshadowed out, I know how it's going to end. But everything in the middle, he's trying to get things set up, move things in order to go in the way that he wants. And the reason I say that is because I think God, for love to exist, right, free will needs to exist, because I can't make a robot or an automaton, that moves and say, love me, because that's not love. I've created you to love me. But if I give him free will, I'm entering the option to hate me, because I've made this world so hard to live in, so complex. The existential crisis that Kierkegaard spoke about when he talked about existential angst. Like, it's hard, man. Why am I living? What's the point to all of this? Why do I go to work and I suffer? Like, God created that reality. But in order for there to be love, there had to be free will. And I feel like in that sense, that's why I can't necessarily jump on the bandwagon.
You brought the crazy point, I think. So if you
I'm not at all against free will. Yeah.
If you create AI that can actually think, that can actually learn, that can actually learn how to feel.
Tangent.
What happens to that AI?
We'll never create it. AI? We are. But what did Brian say?
What if we do?
Oh, man.
I think we are working towards that, right?
We are so close if we haven't done it already. And it's arbitrary, because like whether we're living in a simulation or not, like it's all fractal. So like on some scale, and like we're like just a speck on an atom in some other universe. You know, even our galaxy is just almost nothing in some other world, in some
Probably.
on some scale. I think the universe expands infinitely, and that if we zoomed out, we would see other worlds just like this if we could.
Yeah, I sometimes, to Darko's earlier point, as far as like, well, what happens if physics come out and introduces something new and it completely erases the entire worldview and foundation of Christianity and all that stuff? I think we need to not put our eggs in our. I don't think we need to really.
Fundamental problem of religion is that they've created a structure that God cannot fit in.
Now that's a solid point. I agree with you on that one, but I also think science lies. And there's a variety. I mean, this is just a list of times that science has lied, and you can go through it. You can.
I think the list of times religion has lied would be equally as long, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, religion is a very large context, so we'd have to go into which religion. But my point, no. My point isn't necessarily to put the two against each other. It's just to weaken the control that I think science has in the minds of people.
Yeah.
Because science is a blanket statement, right? Science is many things. Mathematics, physics, things that you can study in the real time. Those are more concrete science than paleontology, where you're finding half a bone and then you're trying to figure out what the rest of the bone look like, and then you're trying to extrapolate and interpolate what that creature must look like with just a fraction of the bone to begin with. That's not sturdy science. That's inference, and that is conjecture at its essence. But it's been called science, and it's been used to discredit Christianity, just like evolution has been used to discredit Christianity. Just like
I have no problems with evolution or paleontology. I know that some Christians call like dinosaurs demons. In my opinion, that's crazy. Like they did physically exist. Demons, as far as I'm concerned, are just bad thought processes, bad ways of processing information.
So now this is interesting. Oh man, I wish we had an entire day to go through this. Do you think that humans are a product of evolution?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, so this is fascinating too, because then religion is a product of evolution as well.
So I think evolution is inherent in consciousness itself. As time relates to the physical world, with like entropy necessitates evolution. You know, with the passage of time, it's directly linked to entropy. So
entropy being exactly. Now that's what I want to talk about, because evolution and change are completely two different things.
So entropy is in my own words, is the going from the singular to the infinite. It's this it's a direction, and it's linked to time.
Yeah.
So, the reason why we're able to perceive more than a singularity is because time is expanding, and the reason we're able to experience this world in the way that we do, with time passing in the way that it does, with this perceived like linear time, but in the scale that it exists, I believe that it's caused by the expansion rate of time as the universe expands.
It sounds like an enormous trip. Let me break it down. And again, right? Let's talk a little bit more about evolution definition-wise.
Okay.
Define it.
So we can see it generationally. So and it's dynamic in that it affects everything. Evolution is in everything. when Melissa and I are taking the parenting tools that our parents gave us, like they're teaching us all these things, like how to live in this world. And then we're taking those, and Melissa and I are combining them, like figuring out what the best thing is, like
building upon it.
Yeah, we've got this, like you've got this, and I've got this. Like, let's put this together and see what we come up with. Oh, it's this concept 2.0. It's the next version. Let's apply it to our kid. And then she is going to go and raise kids, and with her husband, she's going to build on what we taught. We're not getting it perfect. Everything is evolving and changing and improving as best it can. It's natural selection in a sense. But I'm also open to the idea that humans themselves were at some point genetically manipulated. I believe that's possible, but
that would have
I really
to be
don't have
from
any.
An outside.
It would have to be from some sort of some sort of intelligent being. That's.
And why do you think it has to be intelligent?
Intelligent meaning like sentient in the way that I guess in a way that's at least somewhat relatable to how we exist.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to trick you or anything. I'm just saying because one of the things that are amazing about humans, right, is that we are intelligently designed. Your heart has 5 valves in them. If you take one of those valves away, the heart stops working. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of incredible things about us. Our eyes, right, the way it dilates and you can brings in light and then transcribes the light into neuronic messages that's interpreted by the brain to like.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. The definition the neo-Darwinian definition of evolution is natural selection, but it precludes mutation, right? Because the old definition of evolution is that natural selection would occur. I have these 3 things, and then I pick these 2. I naturally select these 2, and this one dies, and now I only have these 2 things, and then time goes on. And then
going back to parenting, like I got stuff from my dad and stuff from my mom, and kind of figured out like what's the best thing here. We're gonna take this good idea and let all the other shitty ideas just disappear, and then I'm gonna take this treasure that I've got and find my wife Melissa, and she's gonna take her ideas that she got from her mom and her dad, and then we'll put that together. So like it is a dynamic, but how do I word this? It's dynamic in that it affects everything. And
the term evolution.
It really is a fractal. Everything's connected. Everything works in that a fractal pattern where it's all things coming together. Like just think of a father's sperm and a mother's egg coming and making a baby, and then that baby goes and grows up, makes another baby.
Yeah. So that's the piece of it. Like, okay, I guess I'll start from square one. I don't believe in evolution, and I think there are a lot of reasons that I can poke holes in evolution. That I think some of those reasons are still used in today's college textbooks as facts, but they've been disproven, and those textbooks haven't been updated. For example, the appendix. The appendix was once considered a vestigial organ, an organ that we once had that had meaning that we don't necessarily need anymore. That scientific
But you believe in the Big Bang, correct?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, but I like to use common understanding of how people talk about the universe. So if I'm talking to an atheist, if the atheist likely believes in the theory of the Big Bang, then he believes that the universe had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, then
I believe in the Big Bang, but I don't necessarily believe it had a beginning. I believe it had a singularity.
Singularity.
Beginning means that it would be some sort of illogical stopping of time, which is impossible because it is.
Actually, it's funny because the Bible, if you were to consider the Big Bang, right? There's three things that would have to happen in the beginning in the Big Bang, right? Time would have to be created because you can't have a beginning without time. So time has to be created. Space needs to be created. And then matter needs to be created. So time, space, continuum, right? So time allows you something to begin. Space allows something to actually begin in somewhere. And you know what actually answers all three of those questions? The very first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, there's time. God created the heavens, there's space, and the earth, there's matter. All three of those questions have been answered in the very beginning of the Bible, man. So in that context, I think if everything did come into creation, it had happened all at once.
Not if you're looking at it from a fractal perspective. If it's a fractal, then you can find the singularity, and that singularity is also the expansive universe. It's everything. So it's all there, but it is all singular.
It's all there.
It really is singular.
And there precludes space. You can't have it there without some.
So singular as in all of space and time condensed into a singular point.
Yeah. All right. So let's go based on that, and let's kind of build on that, because the one thing I want to talk about too is
going back to evolution real quick. I believe that everything that exists has a common ancestor with the singularity of the Big Bang.
All right, so that's an interesting thing, right? So there's like 7 definitions of evolution. You have, and this actually might not even be the best, what I'm looking for, now that I'm looking
I probably wouldn't hold to any of them.
No, what I'm looking for is this. All right, so you have cosmic evolution, chemical evolution, stellar evolution, organic evolution, macroevolution, and microevolution. All of these forms of evolution had to occur for us to get to where we are today. Now, talking about your taking information from your dad and your dad taking information from him, that's more of an informational evolution and less significant to the conversation that I want to have, which is about biology and how that evolves. And
the same thing happens with the genetic information that's passed down.
The mutation of the genetic information, right? You can't introduce new traits without a mutation.
Well, mutations can happen, like I could get cancer sort of thing. That would be a mutation, but also the new combination of genetic material. Like Melissa and I have never combined our genetic information before Avonlea, you know?
Yeah.
Never in all the universe has it happened before.
This is true. This is very true. Yeah. So 99.7.8% of all mutations are either negative or have no effect at all. So if you're talking about evolution from a mathematical standpoint, and there's actually, if you go to science.org or nature.org, there's actually articles about this where, mathematically speaking, the variety that we have today and would have had previous to some of the animals being extinct due to a lot of reasons, murdering and killing off of those animals, mathematically, we couldn't have gotten to the number and the variety of animals that exist based on the current synthesis of evolution, the current formula of evolution. Because the mutations that exist, 99% of them are either negative, which you have like an arm growing out of your neck, or you have a chromatic disease that would prevent you from excelling.
Given an infinite amount of time.
No, that's actually precluded. That's actually that's using the time that evolution has.
So you're saying, like, based on us on the universe being 14 billion years old or whatever they say it is, we wouldn't have had enough time to evolve?
Correct. And let me find a story on. Hold on. Again, the thing All right, so one of my favorite.
I've made leaps and bounds of improvements upon what my parents have given me. You know,
information-wise, yeah.
In a lot of ways. I think evolution happens a lot faster than most people think, and I also think the universe is a lot older than people think it is. Simply because of the expansion rate of time and time being relative. As time expands, it speeds up.
Yeah.
So
are you familiar with the redshift?
No.
The redshift that's the science term that they use for how they have come to the conclusion that the universe is actually expanding. And there's a lot of assumptions that go into it that, you know, it's not something I would definitively put as.
It seems to make good sense to me that the extent of what we can see makes us think that I can't remember the exact numbers, but it gives us the universe is at least this big sort of thing, and it's something like 14 billion years old, something like that.
Yeah.
And because the universe is expanding, the things that would be beyond that, the light just hasn't had enough time to get here. Yeah. And the reason that we're only seeing that much, and the reason the universe is expanding at the rate that it is directly related to time expansion.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I'll share this with you real quick these are I just Googled it, right? The evolution not mathematically possible. I can actually go find the actual book that I have that actually kind of dives into it a little bit. But let's see if I can find one. Oh, you know what? That's right. His name's Gould. Synthesis of evolution. Man, I hope this isn't loud, typing it in like. Sorry. So an interesting one right here, Stephen Jay Gould, evolutionary biologist. I'll see if I can find it.
So I guess my problem with evolution is most of the people who are anti-evolution, it seems to me that evolution is so prevalent and so pervasive that it just seems like the obvious thing. Clearly things are evolving, but then when I see people who are anti-evolution, Christians, even myself included, years ago, it was because I was holding on to some sort of at least my perception of is it's antiquated ideas that are built on arbitrary religious doctrine, or I guess there's a better word for it.
Yeah. Like the one question that the one sentence that I feel like really gave me confidence that evolution was baloney. First off, if you haven't seen, are you familiar with Kent Hovind?
No.
I'd suggest, he's got a controversial background right now because they came after him legally and sent him to jail. But by far his argument that he made with regards to evolution, and the reason they did it was an ad hominem attack. They tried to get any reason to destroy his reputation because he was going to Stanford, he was going to Berkeley, he was going to all these prevalent colleges and completely destroying the worldview that these kids had. Because when you're in a college setting, you're surrounded by an educational authority called the professor, who's giving you ideas. As a student, you're younger, you can't have a discussion with the professor, and he's telling you everything that he's telling you is truth. And then you leave college thinking that everything he told you was truth. And then Kent, what he does is he's like, well, here's what he's telling you, and this has been reduced as false, or it's been overturned scientifically. This has been overturned scientifically. This has been overturned scientifically. And he keeps going down and down. And the next thing you realize, all the evidence and facts that they use to back up this theory of evolution just go away. And then you're like, all right, well then what do you base it off of? And he has a lot of debates on YouTube. One of the ones I love watching is the one with Michael Shermer, who's the president and an author, a main editor, chief editor of the publication called Skeptic Magazine. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast, but he absolutely obliterates Michael Shermer with his arguments. But it's not my point. What helped me realize is that there's not one mutation. This is going back to why I considered evolution to be silly. There's not one mutation that introduces novel complexity into an organism. What the heck does that mean? What that means is there's not a mutation that can tell my body, once it mutates, to start growing feathers. All it can tell my body to do is to take the genetic information that's in there and to put it somewhere else or to move it slightly different. It can't tell me to grow something different. It can't tell me, it can't introduce anything. It can only take what's there and kind of manipulate it. So what does that mean? It means you can never have a fish to a bird to a mammal. You can't have the theory of evolution that's been proposed to us, even if you're given 400 billion years for it to happen. It still mathematically will never happen because natural selection only selects what it's able to select.
So there's a lot to unpack there. I guess the main thing would be there's a term, I can't remember what it is right now, but basically when it's like all the parts combined equal more than the whole. What is that word?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
It's an argument that people use to basically say that, well, if you only had a little bit of a wing, then what evolutionary advantage would that provide? You'd have to have the whole wing for it to actually be advantageous. But there's a phrase for it. I'll think about it, but keep going.
Well, there's a word for that I think is an interesting concept. But basically, the way that you define that was that no novel change. What was that way you define that?
Yeah, there's no novel. Now you're gonna make me forget my own saying. There's no mutation.
You're recording this, so don't worry.
I know, right? There's a mutation doesn't exist that introduces novel complexity.
Novel complexity.
And you know what? I might be able to find a video.
Yeah, I guess the way that I would interpret that, and I don't know if this is what they mean, but is that like you can't have like a novel mutation to a rock to change it into a bird sort of thing?
It's not that big of a step.
That as well?
It's not that big. That's too large of a jump.
It might as well be.
It's more so like, can my fingernails mutate in such a way to where the texture and the form of it
has to be like the next step.
Correct.
Yeah, so you can only go one level further based on what you got. Yeah. And then
I want to start small, right? I don't want to be one of those guys who says, oh, well, you can't turn a fish to a bird. And because what ends up happening is people who believe in evolution will say, well, it doesn't happen that way. It's one little bitty movement over hundreds and hundreds of millions of years. And then that's eventually how you do that. But we don't call that science. What we call that's a belief in an idea. That's almost a religion. You can't prove to me any of that happens. And if you can't prove to me that a mutation can introduce novel complexity, so much so that it could turn into something later down the road, then that's the very crux. That's the foundation of evolution. You can't solve that. You don't got a theory.
There are some people groups in like the South Pacific who live on islands, and they almost exclusively live from boats, and they've adapted to be able to hold their breath for drastically longer than the rest of us can, land dwellers. And it would not surprise me if, hundreds or thousands of generations from now, if they continued doing that and continued holding their breath underwater and swimming in the water, that like, who's to say that the cells in their lungs don't start evolving into something more like gills?
Well, if we can't prove it, we have nothing. But I think a better argument you might use is that there's people in Africa who have sickle cell anemia. And the sickle cell actually fights off certain diseases that are prevalent in Africa, right? And that's an argument that people use. Well, hey, you know, if you had this disease, you didn't have sickle cell, you die. But if you have sickle cell, then you actually survive. And so that's an argument that's used sometimes to try to say, well, you know, the body has adapted by changing the shape of the blood cells so that it can fight off this disease. But that's basically akin to me saying, well, you can't get athlete's foot if I cut off your leg. It's like, you're not, just because you're having a slight shift in the blood cell shape isn't going to give enough change in order for you to, it's not going to be a significant change.
So you think that some change happens? Like what?
100%, 100%, man.
Yeah, of course.
But variation and change is different than evolution.
How far can you change? How far are you willing to say that something is able to change?
I think that's a great question.
What's the difference between a change and evolution? I guess what draws the line?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And that's, the Bible talks about it. The Bible calls it that the kinds will mate with their kinds, right? And there's, all right, so Linnaeus, are you guys familiar with Linnaeus classification?
No.
Linnaeus is the guy who scientifically classified all the animals, and I hope I'm saying his name.
It's not the most modern classification.
No, it's not. No, but it's the only one I'm remembering. But the point of it is that he used a taxonomy or a classification to describe how, you know, birds have feathers and they have beaks, and he listed all of these features, right? And if you didn't have one of them, then you branched off and you were this. And that's how he would create these branches, is that he would base it on the actual shape and the anatomy of those creatures. The Bible calls them kind, right? So an example of that would be horses, or things like horses.
It's not a technical term, to be fair.
No, and no, it's not, and neither is the classification that we have today, because there are still different species according to our normal day classifications that actually can't interbreed, like dogs and coyotes. They're actually considered two different species, which actually goes into another definition that we'll get into. But to my point, horses can mate with horses and have viable offspring called horses. Horses can also mate with donkeys, zebras, and they can also have viable offspring. Look up Z-donk. A Z-donk is a donkey and a zebra hybrid.
That's awesome.
Right? It is, and they exist. I'll find one. You can have a zorse, which is a zebra horse. All of these creatures.
I know a lot of them are sterile.
No, surprisingly. But
what if you're a guy who owns like a Z-donk? It's funny.
But these creatures exist, and the reason they exist is because you can mate with the same kind, but you'll never be able to have a horse mate with a lizard and come off with a new creature, right? Yeah. And so, but you'll have variations within that kind. You'll have big people like Darko. You'll have short, ugly people like me. You'll have middle people who are good looking like Brian. You'll have variation within the species or within the kind themselves. You can have a roach that is strong enough to feed off like bug spray, but you'll never have a roach strong enough to beat off a hammer, right? Like there's limitation to the variety.
Can I be like
I've definitely thrown my shoe at cockroaches that didn't die.
I'll be a form of a mediator here. So I just want to bring up one point before I'll let you, Brian. So I guess so Ben, you're bringing up the point, different species can't, mate with each other. But I think that the evolution, so fish did not necessarily mate with, other species in order to become, whatever land animal. It evolved. But, so I guess, what do you think about that? There's some fish that have, I don't know if I would call them wings, but they fly out of the water and they can stay out of the water for a couple of, But then you also have some fish that live on the land for, I'm not sure how long. I've seen those fish. do you think is that evolution, or are those just some kinds, or did they have to evolve in order to have some specific I guess abilities,
I
in
know
order
exactly
to
what you're saying.
survive? But
No,
yeah, I
I
guess
know.
that's my point. Like, did they like have to mate with some land animal in order to get those abilities, or were they just able to, kind of did nature force them to, over time, create those abilities themselves?
Yeah, there's a lot of creatures that when you look at them, you're like, all right, well, that looks automatically like two different creatures, right? First one that comes to my mind is a platypus. You look at it and you're like, how did a beaver and a duck mate? How did this happen? This is phenomenal. We need to tell the world. The next obvious question that comes from that, if you're looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, is, okay, well, how did this guy evolve? Have they always been here? Or did they evolve over time? So to answer your question, Darko, I think the honest answer is I don't know. There's some creatures where you look at them and you're like,
we don't know, and I think all this theoretical. Like, I think
of course.
most of this conversation was theoretical, but yeah, let me know. Like, I think that what you're getting to is like, can we prove? Like, you don't. I understand that you don't know, but can we prove that this is actually true? Like that these animals evolved from fish that was just going through the water and over time realized that have to, I don't know, catch flies or whatever, and they have to fly out of the water to survive.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get what you're saying, and I think that there's thousands of creatures, right? There's thousands of animals, and they all have varieties and variances. To answer Brian's original question, what is the limitations to those variations? I think the limitations to those variations, genetically speaking, they are what they've been given, right? If I was to marry somebody of a completely different, well, perfect example, my wife is Mexican, I'm white. We have different features, anatomical features that come with our race. When we have our child, July 28th, a little baby comes out. It's 100 days away, by the way. 100 days away till my baby girl comes out.
Thank you.
So when my baby comes out, she's going to have a blend of features from my wife and I. All right? That is, in a sense,
that's a good point.
Microevolution, right? But microevolution is a misnomer. It literally should just be called variation, because you're going to have variations, but you're not going to have such drastic variations that, again, it's going to allow you to introduce some novel feature in your anatomy that natural selection can act upon.
Do you believe that flying fish were created by God just like that, or do you believe that like generations ago there was a species of fish that was an ancestor of these flying fish that they would jump out of the water to escape prey, and the fish that could stay out of the water the longest survived longer, and so the ones that had longer fins, they lived longer, and so they passed that genetic trait on, and then to their kids, when the next generation is out there trying to escape predators, they're jumping out of the water, and they've got longer fins than everybody. They're surviving longer, able to reproduce more, create more offspring. Those are the ones that are successful reproducers, and so that genetic mutation gets compounded as long as it continues to be beneficial. Have you guys seen any of the artificial intelligence simulations of evolution?
Not necessarily.
Super cool. I guess going back to
to answer the question, though, I do believe that God created them that way. The wings. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think. I mean, why do turtles have shells? Why do giraffes have long necks? Why do black people have black skin? I mean,
that's another
I think
point.
God created us.
But if so,
by
if
using
God,
evolution.
that's another point. So if God created Adam and Eve, like why are there so many different, races then? Like
Now that's an
why?
interesting question.
Yeah, did we go to like different parts of the planet and then we adapted to our surroundings, and that's how we became different, like in a way that that we look like? Is
Well,
that evolution?
Tower of Babel, I think would be what I would lean on. That's the only part. There's actually two parts, right? If you're using a biblical worldview, then one of them, in my opinion, makes me wonder if Tower of Babel, when God sent everybody to the corners of the earth, when he did that, perhaps there were changes that had occurred either immediately or on the environment themselves. They had to change, and then one guy bred a whole bunch of people, and those whole bunch of people look like him. I don't know is the honest question. That's one of those questions that is really interesting to think about. And then I forgot what the other part of the question that you had. It was about different races and something else.
I guess I was just thinking, like, if Adam and Eve's offspring went to different parts of the planet.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So Tower of Babel, and then the other one was when the Bible says that angels came down and mated with people.
Well, that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
I know, man. I know, but that makes you wonder. Maybe that somehow brought some of the different races.
Extraterrestrials.
Oh.
Not saying it's aliens, but it's
there you go.
But seriously, back to like evolution as a whole. Are you willing to entertain the thought experiment?
Always, dude. That's why we're here, man. I'm not saying I know anything. I'm just saying the arguments that I've heard for both sides. Yeah. Right now, I feel like evolution is standing upon a very weak structure.
Interesting.
And most people don't know it because they're not taught it.
I mean,
not that they don't know evolution. They don't know the counter arguments to evolution.
And that might be assuming too much.
Well, that goes back to stories that are peer-reviewed articles, in those articles where it says, "Hey guys, our synthesis of evolution, it's not complete. It's missing, and we need a further leg to stand on." And so I can try to find these articles for you, and then it goes even farther. Like, how do we sell the idea of Darwin?
Yeah, and I'm not a fan of Darwin, but
there's an obvious weakness. So Darwin's interesting.
I guess the thought experiment would be something. I guess I'm putting this together as I'm sitting here. Imagine that evolution is a thing, and like you can see how it's possible that we've come to this conclusion that we've evolved, right? Like it.
I understand the argument of evolution.
Okay.
Yeah.
So imagine that is the case. Like, how would that undermine your religious beliefs?
Oh, it's a great question. And another one of those questions that's thrown out as a way to get believers to be like, hey, we're not going to hurt your religion at all, but I think it flies in the face of religion. I think that God created everything, is in my opinion, right? We're too intelligently designed to be a mistake. And so that is a big piece of it. The other piece of it, again, if you can show me a mutation that introduces novel complexity, then I would have an argument that evolution could be true. But without that, I think
novel complexity. I think it needs to be defined more.
All right. Do you know who Hitchens is, or Richard Dawkins, rather?
Yeah.
Richard Dawkins. He was the gentleman who was asked that question: is there a mutation that can introduce novel complexity? And he sat there for 5 minutes wondering. And then he said, turn off the camera. Because he couldn't find an answer.
Yeah.
And because he knows that's the weak link in the chain of evolution. If you don't have that, okay. And then here's another thing. Hold on. Yeah. The other thing that we don't talk about, that many people like to talk about too, is what foundation does long Earth stand upon? Like, why do you assume or presuppose that Earth is millions and millions of years old.
Well, are you familiar with last Thursdayism?
Last Thursdayism, I think I might be. It's been go on.
It's the idea that all of existence came into being last Thursday.
Yeah. And you'd never know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't really help your point.
So there's a lot of evidence, specifically geological evidence, that makes me think the Earth is very old.
Go on. And that's
I think
the point.
it's probably older than even scientists think it is. And like, really, how do you measure the age of a rock? Does the start date happen when it became solid, or when the when the crystalline structure formed, or was it the last time it was broken, or is it when the atoms themselves were either fused in a star or degeneration from half-life? Like, how do you date the age of things? But I think the geological argument is pretty solid as far as telling us how old the Earth is.
And that's exactly what most people say, but that's
it's substantially older than most religious people think. But some Christians think that some Christians think all sorts of things. But generally speaking, Christians think the Earth is between like 12 and like 50,000 years old, and it's obviously so much older than that.
I'm glad you brought up this, because this is another one of those presuppositions that Christians and a lot of atheists don't do a lot of background research into. I don't want to say they don't do a lot of background research. They don't take two sides of the story. They're given one side of the story and then they believe it. Back to the original question you had a long time ago, I think the word that you were looking for was irreducible complexity.
No.
That wasn't it?
No.
Okay, all right, so my bad. So then back to geology and strata and understanding how fossils are dated, how rocks are dated. There are a variety of radiological type techniques that are used to determine how old certain fossils can be, how old certain rocks can be. And a variety of them give different age ranges, right? One of them can be measured from 1,000, one of them can measure from 100. I think a lot of people, radiological dating is the term. I'm trying to find my notes because I have a list here on, let's see, on the actual types of radiological dating, carbon dating being one of them. Here we go, found it. All right, boom, let me share it real quick. So you have radiological dating, uranium-238, lutetium-176, potassium-40, all of these different forms of effective dating that scientists use to measure the age of the Earth. I don't know if you can see it. Oops.
I had a notification come up on my phone.
No worries.
Locked me out.
All right.
Oh my gosh.
Darko, you can see it, right?
Yep.
Right? All right, cool. So to Brian's earlier point, this is where you measure a half-life and you try to figure out, all right, well, if the half-life has gone down this far, then you extrapolate it out and you're like, all right, well, given that, then I can estimate that the Earth is 10 million years old or older. And there's actually a lot of like assumptions that go into it. I'm trying to see if I can find the actual article where it talks about, maybe this is it. Where it actually kind of dives into the idea, the circular reasoning of this. Let's see. So this is pragmatism versus materialism and stratigraphy. Stratigraphy is the counting of rocks in a layer of Earth, right? So you cut through Earth and you're like, all right, here's a layer, here's a layer, here's a layer. Scientists use that as a way to kind of help them understand how old is Earth, you know? And there's been a variety of techniques used, and every one of them has given different answers. Well, this layer must be 1,000 years, and this layer must be 10,000 years, and that's how they kind of come with that stratigraphy piece of it. And I'm trying to jog my memory here, but this is from the American Journal of Science back in 1976. This is written by a guy named J.E. O'Rourke, and he talks about the intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning in the use of rocks to date the fossils and the fossils to date the rocks. So what does that mean? When you're going to date a fossil and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, this fossil was found in this layer of Earth, there is a circular reasoning that goes behind it, because both the rock and the fossil have fossilized, or the fossil is fossilized. It's not it's not a biological structure anymore. It's basically rock. And so what the geologist has to do is then assume, and this is coming back to me slowly. So there's things called index fossils. Are you guys familiar with index fossils?
No.
All right. So index fossils are what are used as the basis to judge how old carbon dating and all that stuff is and how old fossils are. And I'm going to have to go back and refresh myself. I might have to update myself on some of my lingo here. Here we go. Just so we're all on the same page. This is better than, let's just do this one. New share, bow, 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 bow. All right. So there's something called I think it's the Precambrian explosion, and every layer of Earth is given a different name. The thing is there's no one place in the entire world where you have every single layer of Earth in order. You'll have one layer, it'll skip to another layer. You'll have 3 layers here. You'll have 25 layers here. And why is that important? Well, these fossils that they found, they called index fossils, and a lot of them actually look like they come from the ocean. You have things like the paradoxides, the very bottom one in the Cambrian period. If you find a creature or a fossil in that layer, and you also find a paradoxides, they've used the paradoxides as an index fossil to basically tell them how old they think that fossil is. And and the reason it's circular logic, so it's a fossil that is useful. I don't know if you can see it. So, and my thoughts are all over the place right now, so forgive me if I'm not speaking eloquently.
Yeah.
But a fossil that is used for dating strata.
And it really is. I'm with you that that's kind of like an arbitrary thing. Like they have no way of really knowing how long ago it was, even if the scale of time mattered in that sense. But if you just look at the like how long it takes to create an inch of sedimentary rock, and then we see like layers upon layers. Like if you go to the Grand Canyon, you can see like a mile of these layers that are just packed onto each other, and we're just at the surface. The crust goes like miles and miles deep.
Well, have you asked yourself that question? How does sediment form?
Yeah.
Because erosion's kind of a thing.
Erosion. Yeah.
But erosion, it erodes. It doesn't add.
So it erodes the stuff that's there and brings it to like a layer where it's flat, and then whether it's water or just like debris that's flown onto it by the wind, it settles in an area and then gets more layers packed onto it. And the reason why the fossil record isn't very trustworthy is because, like, what if you're out there exploring fossils, you find like a 50 million year old little thing, and you trip and fall and die, and or like a rock falls on you and crushes you. Nobody ever finds you, and then millions of years later, some anthropologist is finding your fossil record among these 500 million year old creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
There's all sorts of contamination can happen, but
Yeah, I guess
sorry if
I
I
didn't
didn't
mean
answer
to
your question.
derail ours. No, you're fine. I didn't mean to derail us. I guess my biggest point was that old Earth, the theory of old Earth, is presupposed based upon a variety of things, and those presuppositions inform the data in radiological dating, and so people use that. But you're basically it's dude, I hate to say it without sounding like a complete loony. It's all a lie, man. It's all just this circular logic that's been made up. And then when you do research, dude, I wish we had a lot of time because I would dive deep into some of these stories about how.
But on the scale of the universe, like as far as it relates to time, where do you land? Like, how does this relate to that?
It relates to the fact that I don't think it's millions and millions of years old. How old do I think it is? I have no idea. I don't think it's as old as we think it is. That's for sure. I feel like I mean, again, it has to do with when you look into some of the it's not because I'm just kind of going off my gut, right? If I was just going off my gut, I'd look like a dork. But if I can shoot holes through some of the scientific theories and say, all right, some of these scientific theories, they're really not that solid. But a lot of other science uses those theories as a basis to justify their own science. That's kind of how science is done. All science is created. You do a science article, I'll write science. And I'm like, well, according to the article Brian said, paragraph 593, an animal has done this and done that. And then I build upon what you've done in your research, and that builds upon that research. And if I have 6 or 7 different people, and those people have 6 and 7 different people,
and you can be wrong if one of those
if one of those people is incorrect.
Yeah, you can be building on your foundation.
It's interesting to think about the scientific method because scientific method. I think the scientific method works by also creating problems. So for every solution that you make, you create multiple different problems. I feel
That's
like.
A good point. Yeah.
So, like, I guess the question is, by trying to find out things scientifically, are we getting further away from the answer?
I think that
or are we getting closer? So I don't know.
I think the scientific method is the most useful system that we have right now.
I
agree. I think it's awesome. I think
it's helping us immensely, But I'm just basing it off this topic right now that we have.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we throw it away. I'm just saying. I mean, there's different methods of science. Some are more concrete than others. Mm-hmm. Physics is way more concrete than historical science, like paleontology.
Yeah, for sure.
It's when
even more.
here's the big kicker. Like, there are articles that were written by the Royal Society, and there are men who wrote to one another in defense of trying to tear down the young Earth belief that the Catholic Church held hundreds of years ago, because the Catholic Church was in power, and these men wanted to practice science, but under the subtext of not a Christian worldview. They wanted to think that the Earth was a different thing, and they were like, all right, if we can destroy the belief or the faith.
Scientists should be objective. They shouldn't be working in the framework of a religion.
Oh,
they should be free to openly discover anything.
And that's what those gentlemen who, well, first off, the church created every form of science and math. It all started from the church. And then the guys who were practicing it, not
just the Christian church, but
Islam.
Sorry?
Islam as well.
Yeah. They were at one
numbers.
point.
The golden age of math. Yeah.
The numbers that you're using, they are, how do you call them? Arabic numbers, or do you guys have the same
Aramaic?
word?
Yeah, Aramaic. I think. I know what you're saying, though.
Yeah.
The point is, a lot of it came out of religion, and the men who were in there, they were looking for a way to poke holes in the age of the Earth, because if they could do that, they could start challenging the authority that the Catholic Church had. It's actually fascinating, man. When you go into the history of this stuff and you start reading the letters that these guys wrote back and forth, I'm trying to find it. I have it here in my Evernote somewhere. But
Seems
they talk.
Yeah, it seems awesome.
What's that?
It seems awesome. Yeah, if they can, I think religious institutions are largely flawed in that they force an opinion, really. Any denomination is really just like an agreed upon opinion, and if they can get centralized power like the Catholic Church has had in the past, I think decentralizing that is a great idea, especially if it's done with good science. Yeah.
And that's what these gentlemen were doing. I'm trying to find it. They were trying to get rid of that power for obvious reasons. They are the only boys in town that were allowing them to do science, and the church would fund the science. And it is extremely fascinating because you have to kind of go back into that world and what they were doing and how they lived. And these were brilliant men without Nintendo, without the internet. And they were basically trying to denounce the Catholic power so they could do what they want. Oh, here it is. It was Lyell's letters. I think this is it. Let's see.
While you're pulling that up, I'll just say it's pretty amazing how big a factor the funding is as far as what type of research is done and what conclusions are made.
Dude. Oh, you know what? And it's funny how you say that, because here's an interesting unfolding of historical science. So there's something called, I believe it was called the Mosasaurus was the name they eventually gave it, but it was originally discovered. And you guys, this is so cool, man. This literally blew my mind when I first figured this out. When most of the fossils paleontologists find, they don't find the whole creature. They might find a portion, like an arm or a skull, and then they extrapolate the rest of the body of that creature, which I know you're immediately asking yourself, like, WTF? Really? I didn't know that. I didn't know it either.
Not always the case, but yeah, often.
It's a vast majority of the cases. You can go to the Natural Museum of History and look at all the fossils that they have on record, and you'd be shocked at how little of the fossils they actually have. So, for example, I won't dive too far into that. I can show you examples here after this. They found a skull. They found a skull discovered in a quarry in the Netherlands. And then a second partial skull was found in Le Grand Animal, right? Similar looking shaped skulls. I don't know if you can see what that one looks like, but it basically looks like an alligator's mouth. So that was in 1764. 16 years later, 1780, they presumed it to be a crocodile by a guy named Hoffman. 4 years later, the National Museum of Netherlands acquired the fossil. And you got to remember this too. Museums started popping up, right, at this time. And why is that significant? Because museums were looked at as authority of information and truth. They were looked at as knowledge. Plus, do you know when the term dinosaur was created?
I remember hearing it, but I don't remember.
Yeah, it was like 1684 by a man, I think, named Richard Owen, right? And it means great lizard is what the term means. Before that, the word dinosaur never existed. You know, it could have been great beast. It could have been giant lizard. Who knows? But the word dinosaur was created a couple hundred years ago. And after the word dinosaur was created, a whole bunch of people, guess what? Started finding dinosaurs. They're like, hey, what's this in the dirt? It's a fossil. No, my man, it's a dinosaur. What kind of dinosaur is it? Let me think. And so the 1784, 20 years later, the Netherlands Museum acquired that same skull. And then 2 years later, the Petrus camper called it an unknown toothed whale. So it went from a crocodile, now it's a whale. In 1994, the skull moved from France from Fracine to a museum as a war booty. So some war happened and somebody stole it from the museum. And then in 1798, Adrian Camper said that it was a giant monitor, which is another term for snake or lizard. So already in the span of 30 years, it went from a crocodile to a toothed whale to a giant snake or lizard. In 1799, Camper told Cuvier that it was a snake. So now he's changed his mind a year later. In 1808, Cuvier confirmed Camper's results that it must have been some extinct animal that died from a catastrophism. And during this time, you had catastrophism versus slow progression unfolding scientifically as two arguments that were being debated. And then in 1822, 80 years later, another scientist shows up on the scene. His name is Conibear. He named it for the first time the Mosasaurus. So 80 years later, it becomes a dinosaur. And Schlegel, which is a different scientist, conjectured that it had flippers. And the reason he conjectured is because the fossil didn't have the body. It was just the skull.
Just a skull.
So he had a conjecture that it had flippers instead of feet. So now he's conjecturing it had flippers instead of feet. And then in 2011, the fossil was preserved as Mosasaur. And then Caldwell in 2012 brings up another story and says, what, if anything, is a Mosasaur? So my point here, right? My point here is this unfolding of scientific knowledge when it comes to historical stuff is so loosey-goosey, man. Like, people don't get it. Like, here's the fossils they found on the left, and then magically it's this. There are people whose jobs are called paleo artists. Their job is to basically take a reconstruct it, and look at that pile of bones. Good luck. You could put any bone up against any bone and say that's how it looked. Like, if I was to take a box of matches and dump them out and then tell you to put them back together again, it's
definitely more complicated, and bones are not the same as matches. They have a lot of markers on them that show you
you're going to have some joints,
what stage of evolution they're in, and all these, I mean, if you believe in that sort of thing. But
Here's one more example. And this is article AM5027 of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? The very first thing that they found was a drawing of the skull. And then these are the actual bones that they have on file. That's it. And so from these, they were able to, and look, you can look up here, this drawing on the top right, all the dark shaded features. Those are the bones that they could find. All the light colored ones, they couldn't find those bones. So 90% of that was imagined.
Well, there's been more than one Tyrannosaurus Rex discovered.
Yeah, this was the first one. And there's a variety of other ones that I can go and show you. Here's some other ones.
So it's my understanding that they kind of have a basic idea of what it's supposed to look like, because they've found 20 Tyrannosaurus Rexes. I don't know how many they found, but let's say they've got 20 partials, and like, they have reason to believe. I would like to think that they would have reason, but let's say they've got reason to believe that these are all the same species. So they say, okay, so this bone perfectly matches with this one, except it's bigger, so we'll reconstruct it based on the scale. And that's my understanding of how they do it.
That's what that's what my understanding was too, before I started kind of looking into it a little bit.
I would think that usually they would have, like, at least, if you combine all the pieces, you've got at least one full structure.
Yes, that's my initial assumption, but that's not the case.
They've certainly found whole dinosaurs before.
Oh yeah. They've found whole skeletons, but sometimes they'll find only partial pieces of the skeleton, and that will be the very first of the new species they find. And then from that, other scientists find other bones, and they might assume.
Why are we talking about this again? I'm not trying to be rude, but where were we trying to get back to?
We're trying to get back to radiological dating and the age of the Earth. And I'm trying to pull up some examples of how historical science is far from concrete, and how how evolution is based upon the presupposition that the Earth is millions of years old.
Okay.
So
If the Earth isn't millions of years old, would you at least concede that the universe is?
I don't have a clue what how old the universe is.
Okay.
That's my honest answer.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
the only reason that we think the Earth is as old as it is, it kind of goes back to the red shift, which I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
And parallax.
Light has traveled at least 4 billion years to get here.
Yeah, and again, these are all arguments being built to try to destroy the. And this is my opinion. It's not my opinion. My opinion is based upon other people who have furthered this information. But parallax trigonometry is the method they use to try to figure out the difference. How far are we from these stars, right? But parallax trigonometry is only as good as like 100 million miles away.
You got to get far from Earth to make it useful.
Yeah, exactly. And so let me show you what I'm talking about. Like parallax trigonometry is like this. It really goes back to cosine and tangent and all that stuff. So like you're looking at this, right? And this is Earth around its rotation, and you take one picture of a star here, right? And I don't know if this is helping.
It's a little bit backlit, which is problematic.
Yeah,
a lot better.
All right, there we go. So Earth, you're taking a picture of Earth, and you're taking a picture of a star here.
Mm-hmm. And those other things are stars in the background?
Yeah, these two things are stars here.
Okay.
All right, and technically they're the same star, but what you're doing is you're basically trying to find,
calculating the angle, and
you got it.
Yeah.
And
I know how it works.
Yeah. So yeah, star 1 and star 2, and there's Earth rotating.
I'm pretty sure that even with that type of calculating, we'd be able to, with the distance and the I guess the like the quality of the instruments, the precision of them being used is good enough that I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure we can know that the universe is at least billions of years old, even based on how far we've been able to get from Earth to have that increased perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's. I'm not going to act like I know the answer, because I don't. But I think that the science that we use is built on a lot of presumptions, and one of those presumptions, one of the presumptions is the stars are further away than they really are.
But earlier you mentioned that there's some strong sciences as well. So should we divide science into theoretical science, like science that's backed by theories, and science that's backed on what you would think are facts?
100%. Yeah.
Like even theoretical science is, fundamentally based on facts. It's the only way that we can reach any sort of, next level.
Yeah.
To build on what we think we know.
No, yeah. I mean, I think that, so and it's very hard to think about this stuff, but, I think that they are necessary. So let's think about it this way. Let's say universe, like all of the stuff that we, have no idea what's happening around us. We, as a humanity, that's a desert, essentially. And we as humans, we take one handful of sand from that desert, and we're looking at that. Like we don't have any ways right now of, seeing how the universe looks like. We can go as far as, I'm not sure what was the furthest we were able to get with our space missions. I don't know. Did we get to like Pluto or something somewhere?
Past Pluto. Yep.
But so what we can do is we can look at this handful of sand, and use different tools to say, okay, this rock is different from this rock, and that rock is different from that rock, and with time use different tools to to figure that out. I guess, how much can we get out of that? Is it a solution for us to get off the planet and go as far as we can and in order to figure the things out, or can we figure out a lot more from what we have? Like, I guess that's
There's
my question.
some ancient, you guys can look it up, I don't have a computer with me, but some ancient philosopher or theologian, it might have been Buddha, said like the universe exists in a grain of sand. Everything's there. It's all a fractal.
Yeah.
It's all the information you'll ever need. It's all in a grain of sand.
I don't know.
But
Darko.
I mean, so
Darko's like, where do I go with that?
I mean, I'm just trying to. I think that this discussion was very interesting. I'm very disappointed that we didn't get to discuss steak, but we can do that. I know one of the topic was like how to cook the perfect steak, but it's fine. I'm cool with it. But I'm just trying.
I'll give you my pointers next time.
Yeah, definitely. But yes, I'm trying to figure out like how can we. I want to get the final thoughts. I want to kind of wrap this whole discussion into something, and I want to see what you guys think. Like, it was a pretty interesting discussion.
So many topics.
I was listening a lot, and I'm just trying to wrap it up and see. I'm not to wrap it up like, okay, we need to go, but I actually want to show you guys another thing that I thought you would find interesting.
Are we talking off the record now, or like, are you going to cut this out?
No, just keep going.
Okay.
But no, I guess I would like to. I hate to close. I don't want to close off the topic, but I want to see some conclusions.
I mean, we have to disconnect at some point.
Yeah, this is gonna be part 2. There's gonna be a part 2 to this.
There's gonna be a part 2, definitely.
Talk about some other things, yeah.
Because I think
maybe
there's
next
a lot
time
of.
we can have a little bit more of a structured format on where we're going, where we're taking stuff.
I definitely think we need to get on the same page, because there's a lot of things that I'm speaking from that you guys are probably like, what is this guy talking about? This dude, he doesn't believe in evolution. I bet he doesn't even believe it. And
Ben,
I feel like
you don't do it that way. So I think that you are a very analytical person. You don't. I think you have that quality where you don't just take stuff for granted. That's told.
I really like that about you, Ben.
And that's you
Well,
you dive into, you do your own research, you dive into things, and I think that's a very good quality to have. Especially in this world where you're just getting bombarded with information, you want to be able to see what actually is true, and what's the best for you, what's the best for your family, like, and you get that through by being analytical, in my opinion. But there are different personalities out there, and I don't think that you are crazy or anything like that. I think that you are analytical.
I'm just hungry, man. When we were talking about existential crises and stuff, and when I was, I don't know, for like 26, 25. No, I was probably 27, actually, 27 probably. And I got to a point to where I was like, if I'm going to believe what I'm going to believe, then I have to start from the very beginning. And because a lot of us take a lot of things for granted because we don't want to put in the time to do all the research and all the work. And when I came across Kent Hovind, the arguments that he was crafting to scientists, crafting to men with PhDs in education, they were so brand new, the arguments, that I had never considered them, and it opened up a door in my mind that I was like, okay, well, if
could you send me a link to some of that, or
100%, man, 100%. He is a fascinating listen, and like I said, conspiracies are a real thing. Epstein didn't kill himself. I think we all know that.
Amen.
Right? So if he didn't kill himself, then conspiracies exist. And if conspiracies exist, then people can go out of their way to inflict harm on somebody they see as a threat. That's exactly what they did to Kent Hovind. They found a way to try to destroy his reputation because he was making a lot of enormous movements about 10, 12 years ago. And
just because conspiracies exist doesn't mean that this is a conspiracy necessarily.
No, not necessarily, but it's my opinion because the guy he's awesome. Changed my life and the way I look at a lot of things, and opened me up to a lot of new arguments that I'd never heard. I didn't know an appendix was necessary. People who have an appendix are much less likely to get certain diseases than those who don't have them. So there is an immunological reason for an appendix. Science 10 years ago says an appendix was a vestigial organ that you didn't need. It was left over from evolution. That's not the case.
Yeah, and I think those things changes like.
I'm here.
No, like I think I've heard some interesting things about appendix. Like it does keep like some bacteria that's very useful for your body. Like especially if you take like I don't know if you flush your body, if you have like a diarrhea or
antibiotics and stuff. Yeah.
And like it keeps some of the if you take antibiotics, it keeps some of the healthy bacteria, like it keeps some of your biome. But again, we just don't know enough about biome at all, and how it works. I feel like there is a lot that we don't know.
Yeah, that's a really interesting subject. How your gut biome affects like your personality,
exactly.
Not just the food that you crave. But that's a topic for another day.
Yeah, but another thing that I wanted to bring up is just take another look at this. Like, it's crazy how people can get influenced, into believing in different things. So Ben, do you guys know who Diego Maradona is?
Madonna?
No. Maradona. He's a soccer player. He was Diego Armando Maradona. He was a soccer player, and he was a very good soccer player back in the day. But he, eventually, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's true, but he got on cocaine and stuff. He got fat and stuff, and he's an Argentinian soccer player. But pull up, Ben. You can pull up. You're like Jamie from Joe Rogan.
I'll pull it up.
Ben,
what do you got?
Yeah. Pull up Church of Maradona.
Church of Maradona. By the way, next time we talk, remind me to share with you the conversation I had with a paleontologist.
So this guy's a soccer player, but you can pull up the wiki page just to see. There's a bunch of people, and there's not. I mean, let me show you exactly. I think it says
Jesus
exactly.
incarnate.
There's 100. there is between 120,000 to 200,000 people that believe that this guy is a god or whatever. I don't know. Like he's like so. It's crazy to me how people.
I guess it would all depend on like how he's getting to this conclusion and why he's wanting people to follow him if he is. Because in a sense, I believe that I'm God. I am, circling back to solipsism. I am unified with God through Christ. So that's kind of my perspective.
Good luck raising yourself up in 3 days.
I know, man.
But this guy has commandments and everything. Like
I was gonna say, this is his commandment.
Love football above all else. Like I mean, it's just funny, But what's fascinating to me, I thought it was like a joke and stuff. But there's like 200,000 people who consider like this. I mean, I guess what makes a religion a religion? It's crazy. What makes
I like this. I like number 9.
Oh yeah.
This is wow, it's beautiful. Beautiful.
That's so funny.
So I think this is a good reason why, just to question, ourselves, I think often on things that we believe, like, and not things that we believe, I think are thought. I think thinking needs to be required more often. And I think having a conversation like this is kind of, it's thinking essentially, because you are challenging your opinion, like someone else challenging your opinion. And I think that if you can do that yourself, if you can challenge your opinion by yourself, you are, I think that's that should be considered thinking, right? It's something. So this is I'm not making this up. This is something that I got from Jordan Peterson. But yeah.
No, dude. I think it's good to have these dialectical conversations where the whole goal is to try to polish your thoughts and arrive at a conclusion that is as close to truth as you can get. We're not all going to have. It's going to be impossible to have the full truth. But we can do our best to get to as close to the truth as we can possibly get. And again, right? All of us, when you go to school, you're only taught one story when it comes to some of the history of and the reason. Here's another thing, and I won't dive into it. I'll shut up. I've been monopolizing it. The reason I think evolution has been pushed so far is because it's the only non-God religion that exists, right? And it's based
not
on
really.
and it's based on naturalism.
There's a lot of religions based on naturalism, like Buddhism. There's no centralized God. And there's like Taoism, things like that.
Yeah, and Mother Earth. But this is like a scientific, right? You can call it science, but it's not science. It's more of a belief that certain things happen over millions of years. But that's where it goes from science to religion. But that's my point. Is because if and that
it's
goes
all
into
religion. Yeah, it's all religion.
Yeah, it goes into the globalist agenda, which I can't get into.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I had a great time.
Thank you, Brian. Sorry, we stayed pretty long, but we appreciate your time. No, it seems like we have a lot more to talk about, so we'd love to have you back,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll have a more structured format for you next time.
Definitely. This was, it was a little bit unstructured, but we touched on a lot. Yeah. It's we're just doing this for fun. I'm not sure how fun that was, but
We'll through natural selection, we'll make choices on what to keep and how to improve this podcast, and over time
That's how it works. Hey, we get better at 1% every time. We get better 1%.
That's the quote, man.
But you know what? Maybe we're
definitely not evolving. This is not.
Maybe we're getting worse.
Yeah, hopefully not. Yep. Hi, Violet.
This was cool, though, man. We learned a lot about you, and we appreciate you opening up and telling us a little bit about, hey, what's up? We got another guest on.
Can't hear you, but Ben is saying hi to you. Ben is saying hi. Can you say hi? He can hear you, but you can't hear him.
Hey. All right, man.
All right, guys. Great talk, and I guess we'll connect some other time again. Have a great night.
Everybody who's listening, don't forget to subscribe.
Bye, guys. Subscribe.